So we're going to start on page 8 with recapping what we learned last week, and then we'll get into the Alter Rebbe. So if you look on page 8, we'll bring us up to speed and try to make this as simple as possible. So let's imagine we are today in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, were the times when the temple stood. So when the temple stood, we had 3 food items that we were obligated to eat, min ha-Torah biblically. Biblically speaking, we have 3 food items we have to eat. We have to eat Pesach, a little bit of meat from the Pesach offering. We have to eat matzah. We have to eat maror. Biblically obligated because we're now standing in temple times. We all know from our Seder that you have Hillel, who would eat all of these 3 items together. Again, we're putting opinion of Rambam aside. We spoke about him on Shabbos. But according to the majority opinions, he would have eaten all 3 items together, Pesach, matzah, and maror. And we have the sages who would have eaten them separately. Okay, so if you look at the box there, we have 2 different versions of how to understand this dispute between Hillel and the sages. We have it here as Meiri and Ramban. It could have been others. I just chose them last week because they were easily played out, but it could be Tosfos, Rashbam, the Balamor, many others who speak around, many others speak on this topic. But we're going with Meiri and Ramban as our model for 2 different ways of understanding the dispute between Hillel and the sages. So let's look at the gray boxes there. You see the gray lines on page 8 in the graph? The gray box, yeah? On page 10, yes, I'm sorry, thank you. I don't know why I said 8. It's page 10. Look at the gray boxes there, yeah? So that's, the gray boxes are what you should do, right? So everybody will agree that should you put them together? Sages, CH standing for Chachamim, say no, and Hillel says yes. Yeah, Meiri Ramban saying. Go over, should you eat them all separately? Should you eat them each on their own? Chachamim say yes, and Chachamim sages say yes, and Hillel says no. The question is, B'di avad. B'di avad means after the fact. If you did it the wrong way, did you do what you were supposed to? So, and this came down to a text that the Gemara introduced in which someone says the word even. Someone says the word even. Even if you did it this way. If you say the word even, that means you're okay with both. So, if I were the Chachamim, and I said you should eat them separately, each on their own, but even if you did it together, you're okay. Or I can go with Hillel. Hillel says you should eat them all together, but even if you eat them separately, you're okay. So who says the even will tell you whether or not you fulfilled your obligation after the fact, doing it incorrectly. Follow that? Yeah, we clear on that? Okay. So now let's look at the white boxes there. If you ate them together, okay, so Hillel, let's go with Meiri, Hillel, of course, says you're supposed to eat them together. So, of course, if you eat them together, you're fine. But Meiri is of the view that the Chachamim will say you may not eat them together. If you ate them together, you're not fulfilling your obligation. You have to eat them separately, according to sages, Meiri. Okay? And conversely, if you ate them on their own, everybody will say it's okay. The sages will say it's okay because they want you to eat it on their own, each on their own. And Hillel will say it's okay because even if you ate it on its own, it'd be okay. Yes, be clear on this, Meiri? Yeah? So, if we're following Meiri, and we're in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, and I wanted to eat it in such a way where I covered both Hillel and the sages, what would I do? Eat them separately. Because in Meiri's view, Hillel will agree, even if you ate them separately, you're okay. We clear? With me, yeah? Okay. Ramban, yes? Good. No, so I in other words, I'm not a Hillelite, nor am I the Sageite, right? I have no opinion. And I want to make sure I'm doing it according to both opinions. Okay, so Hillel will say you still yotze because the end was you ate them. Because Hillel says even if you eat them separately, you're okay. Okay, exactly. And I am after the fact because I ate them separately. Okay, but Ramban puts the even not on Hillel, but on the sages. So, according to Ramban, if you ate them all together, Hillel is okay with them because he wants you to, and the sages would be okay with it because they say even. Even if you put them together, you're okay. Did you have it? But if I ate them separately, Ramban would say, and Hillel would say, no good. Which means, if I'm a Rambanite, and I'm in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, Meiri and Ramban lived way after the Beis HaMikdash. But if I were following Ramban's view, and I lived in temple times, and I wanted to cover all opinions, what would I do? Eat them all together. Because the sages say, even if you eat them all together, you're okay. You clear? Okay. Now comes the Gemara, which we reviewed on page 10. Sorry, page 11, I'm sorry. Next page, let's read. The Gemara comments, now that the halacha was stated neither in accordance with the opinion of Hillel, nor in accordance with the opinions of the rabbis, one recites the blessing, meaning now, as in post-temple times. I don't know who to follow, Hillel or the sages. The Gemara is not saying, I don't know who to follow, Ramban or Meiri, because Ramban and Meiri don't live yet. This Gemara is way before. So the Gemara is only concerned with Hillel and the sages. And they say, because I don't know who to follow, says the Gemara. So one recites the blessing, commanded us over eating matzah, and then he eats matzah to fulfill his obligation. Then he recites the bracha, commanded us over eating bitter herbs, and eats the lettuce as bitter herbs. And then he eats matzah and lettuce together without a blessing, and remembers the temple in the manner of Hillel in the days of the temple, who ate matzah and bitter herbs together with the Pesach offering. Right? So the Gemara is telling us, we have matzah and maror, and then we have the sandwich, because I don't know if I should follow Hillel or the sages. So the question we discussed last week is, what bearing does the dispute between Hillel and the sages in temple times, when you have a Pesach offering, what does it have on our times? What's the problem? Anybody remember what the problem was? In Beis HaMikdash time, all three were biblical commandments. Today you have no Pesach offering, so you have one biblical matzah and one rabbinic maror. You may not eat matzah and maror and Pesach and matzah together, because you may not eat a biblical obligation along with the rabbinic obligation. That's disrespectful to the biblical obligation. We learned that last week. Yes? Okay. So now, if that's the case, I cannot eat matzah and maror together. I have to eat them separately. Even Hillel would agree. So how do I get from a dispute about what the optimal way to do the eating of the three biblical items from temple times, what does that have to do with how I live today? Okay, so let's go Ramban or Meiri. The two opinions how the dispute works. If I go back to the chart, yeah. If I follow, let's go with Meiri first. If I follow Meiri, which means in biblical time, in temple times, if I ate them together, I would have fulfilled all obligations. If I ate them on their own, right? Then I would only follow the sages. Hillel would say that's no good. Yes? So what should I do today? Today I have to eat matzah alone. Matzah must be eaten alone because it's a biblical mitzvah. I cannot mix it with a rabbinic mitzvah. Then what would I do? What should I do? Eat maror on its own to fulfill the mitzvah of eating maror rabbinically. Why should I eat a sandwich now, according to Ramban? Well, because Hillel says you have an obligation, and this is where Ramban gets a little tricky. He says, look, you have an obligation to remember the Beis HaMikdash. And because Hillel says the optimal way, because Hillel says you have to eat it on its together in temple times. So today he says, look, do your maror and do it with matzah so it looks like the way I would have eaten maror in temple times. Which means, this is the question we left off with last week, which means maror is a rabbinic obligation. and matzah is added there. Why? To remember the way he would have eaten the maror then, which seems like I'm mixing a higher obligation, rabbinic maror, with a remembrance obligation of matzah, which I'm not supposed to do. This is one of the big questions that all the commentaries discuss on the Ramban. Follow that question? You turn that question? Okay, that's question number one, if you take Ramban's view. Moreover, okay, now let's go to Me'idi. Me'idi says in temple times, if I ate them all separately, they would have been just fine. So today, if I ate them all separately, also just fine. So why should I have a sandwich? To remember. It's a very weak, if it were, obligation. It's just to remember, not even to remember the way Hillel did it, certainly. It's to remember the way Hillel says to do it optimally. Right. But even Hillel would have said that in Beis Hamikdash time, it would be okay if you ate them separately. It's to remember the way Hillel said to do it optimally. It's very schwach. It's very weak. Follow? This is what we left off last week. And moreover, our final question was, if Hillel was eating it Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, so when during the Seder night did he eat it? We asked this on Shabbos afternoon. You would eat it at the end, because Pesach must be eaten last. So we're doing it to remember Hillel and eating it before the meal. But he would have eaten it at the end of the meal. We should eat two afikoimans, if anything. One afikoiman and one with matzah, to remember that Hillel would have eaten the Pesach offering with all three. So why are we doing it at the beginning? Yeah, these are the questions we left off with. Many commentaries discuss this question. The Alter Rebbe is not the only one to address it, obviously. There's the Bach, Pri Megadim, but we're going to stick with the Alter Rebbe's reading, and you're going to see he's going to go with Ramban's interpretation, which is that the Hillel would say that you cannot eat them together. Hillel would say Hillel would say you cannot eat them separately, you have to eat them together. In Beis Hamikdash time, and the Alter Rebbe is going to learn it in such a way that even today you have to eat it together. So let's see. This is where we're going. We're on page 13. Are we clear so far before we continue? Okay, so now let's read. The Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch Code of Jewish Law, unlike the Code of Jewish Law written by Rabbi Yosef Cairo, the Shulchan Aruch, or even the Rambam, the Alter Rebbe includes backgrounds to every single halacha. So the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Cairo, doesn't say, Torah commands you to do such. Our sages understand it as such, and therefore you should do such. Shulchan Aruch doesn't do that. Shulchan Aruch just says, do, don't do, don't do. Just instruction. Alter Rebbe, for every mitzvah, every halacha, gives all the background. The Torah commands us to do X. Our sages understand it in such and such. Some understand it this way, and therefore you would do this. Some understand it that way, and therefore you do this. And therefore, because you have both these things, do it, right? Alter Rebbe gives all the background. So the Alter Rebbe is going to do the same thing here now for KORECH, and in a few paragraphs, summarize for us very beautifully the whole mitzvah, the whole sandwich, the whole dispute between the sages and Hillel, and he's going to add a few words here that are going to give us a whole different appreciation for what we're doing. Okay, so let's read. According to scriptural law, this translation comes from Chabad.org. According to scriptural law, the mitzvah of eating maror applies only in the era when the Pesach sacrifice was eaten. As is written, you shall eat the Pesach sacrifice together with matzah and bitter herbs. Okay. In the present era, by contrast, the obligation to eat maror is only of rabbinic origin, ordained to commemorate the Beis Hamikdash. Keep that in mind. What's the essence of the mitzvah of eating maror according to the Chachamim? To do what? What's the reason? Why did the Chachamim say to eat maror? What else would you say? Why did he say? Why did the Chachamim tell us to do it? Ordained to commemorate the Beis Hamikdash. The mitzvah of maror itself is to remember the Beis Hamikdash. Let's remember that. Keep going. By contrast, second paragraph, the obligation to eat matzah on the first night of Pesach is of scriptural origin. It's biblical. Even in the present era, as it is written, in the evening you shall eat matzahs. That verse makes no mention of the Pesach sacrifice. So far, so good. Yeah? Halacha 16. Therefore, in the present era, if a person wrapped an olive-sized portion of matzah, that's the minimal amount of matzah, together with an olive-sized portion of maror, the minimal amount of maror, and chewed them together and ate them, he would not fulfill his obligation. The rationale is that marar, which is a rabbinic ordinance, would nullify the taste of the matzah, which is a scriptural commandment. We know this. Yes? You must eat them separately. Good Shiloh, you probably, okay, good Shiloh. We'll leave it. I don't know the answer to that question. Good Shiloh. But for sure you can't do that alone, because your matzah would not, it seems from, where did I see? We started in the 80s, so maybe you would be right. Maybe you would fulfill Morah, but not matzah. Maybe. The problem is, but not the other way around. Yeah, it could be. Okay, so by contrast, and here's where we get to understanding Hillel and the sages. By contrast, in the era of the Beis Hamikdash, when the mitzvah to eat maror was also scripturally commanded, if one ate the matzah and the maror in the manner described, both together, he will fulfill his obligation of eating matzah and his obligation of eating maror. Even according to the sages, who say you shouldn't, but you could if you did, right? The rationale is that the mitzvahs of the Torah do not nullify each other. They are all the same weight, for they all involve fulfilling the commandments of the Holy One Blessed Be He. Moreover, so this is according to the Seit Chachamim. If you ate them together, you're fine. This is Ramban's understanding of the Chachamim, right? That the even goes on the Chachamim, not the Hillel. So the Chachamim agree, even if you ate them together, you're fine. Because mitzvahs ain mebat lezu. If they're both equal in nature, don't nullify. Continues on the Rebbe. Moreover, according to the opinion of Hillel the elder, a person does not fulfill his obligation as prescribed by Torah unless he wraps them together. An olive-sized portion of Pesach sacrifice, an olive-sized portion of maror, and an olive-sized portion of matzah, and eats them together in the fulfillment of the charge. You shall eat together with matzah and bitter herbs. So far, this is like Ramban. That the Chachamim agree, if you ate them together, you're okay. But Hillel says, if you ate them separately, not okay. Ramban so far. Now let's see how he translates Ramban for nowadays. True, halacha yedzayin. In the present era, when maror is rabbinic ordinance and matzah is a scriptural commandment, even Hillel would agree that if a person wrapped the matzah and maror together and ate them, he would not fulfill his obligation to eat matzah, for the flavor of the maror would nullify the flavor of the matzah, because nowadays maror is rabbinic, yes. Accordingly, one is obligated to eat an offside portion of matzah alone, without maror, to fulfill the obligation of matzah according to scriptural law. Nevertheless, here's the key. Ready? Listen carefully. These are the words. According to Hillel, a person does not, even in the present era, fulfill his obligation to eat maror unless he takes an additional olive-sized portion of matzah, wraps it in with an olive-sized portion of maror, and eats them together. What did Rebbe just say? He didn't say, like we were saying before in Ramban, you have a rabbinic obligation to eat maror. You have an obligation to remember the temple. And therefore, it's okay to put them together. What did Rebbe say? In order for you to fulfill the mitzvah of maror, nowadays, according to Hillel, you must eat it with matzah. So when Ramban says that you're allowed to put the matzah together with maror, because the matzah is also to remember the temple, maror itself is zeichel mikdash. Or another way to put it is like this. Rabbi Soloveitchik puts it this way in Haggadah Kedem. You have one obligation to remember the Beis Mikdash. That obligation means matzah and maror together according to Hillel. So which means it's not the pshat that you have to fulfill maror. And because Hillel would have had a matzah, combine it together because to remember. That would take a low-level remembrance and nullify the higher level of rabbinical mitzvah to eat maror. Says Al Rebbe, no, the rabbinical mitzvah to eat maror is to eat it with matzah. Not just zeichel mikdash. Not just zeichel mikdash. But the whole mitzvah is zeichel mikdash. But it's, the mitzvah that Rabbanon is zeichel mikdash. But it's not just, we fulfilled our mitzvah already, and now we're doing a sandwich zeichel mikdash. But actually, according to Hillel, you haven't fulfilled maror yet until you eat the sandwich. Nowadays, which the maror is zeichel mikdash. That's right. So either according to the Chachamim, eating maror itself is enough to remember the Beis Mikdash, or the mitzvah to remember the Beis Mikdash via eating maror. But according to Hillel, without I was learning, you don't fulfill the mitzvah of eating maror today if you don't have matzah with it. Follow? It's called like a chiddush. And this answers the question why we don't eat it at the end of the meal. Because which mitzvah are we fulfilling right now? Maror. If we were just fulfilling the mitzvah of remembering, so do it the way Hillel did it, which would have been later. But it's not just a question of remembering. It's the mitzvah d'Rabbanan. It's the rabbinical mitzvah today to eat marar according to Hillel must include matzah. And therefore you have to eat it right after you eat regular marar. Because what do you want? Like we're going to see soon after Ma'ariv, you want the bracha that you say on marar to extend to your korech also. Because it's really one mitzvah. Just two versions of one mitzvah. The Chachamim say the way to do the mitzvah today is marar alone, and Hillel said the way to do the mitzvah today is matzah and marar together. It answers all the questions. Everything gets settled with this word. It's not mitzvah of marar and then matzah zeichel mikdash. It's mitzvah zeichel mikdash of marar, which includes matzah also. Nothing to do with Afikoimon. Afikoimon is stam zeicher for Pesach. Which is why in the Rebbe writes, that's right. And actually put matzah and marar together. They're equal level, not different levels. That's why you're eating it now. The Rebbe writes in the Haggadah, we'll see after Ma'ariv, that in our version of Haggadah, we don't say before we eat the marar, before we eat the sandwich, we don't say zeichel mikdash kehillel. We don't say it. We begin by saying kenos hillel. Others, Ashkenazim, first say zeichel mikdash kehillel to remember the mikdash like Hillel, and they say this is what Hillel did. We start off right with this is what Hillel did. Because if you said this is to remember the Beis Mikdash, you would say I did marar before, and now I'm just remembering the Beis Mikdash. Not true. According to Hillel, I didn't do marar yet. Until I eat the sandwich, I didn't do marar according to Hillel. Follow? Okay. So far, it's quite clear. We'll see more from after Ma'ariv, and then we'll see how the Rebbe adds mamish one line, and this one line the Rebbe adds gives a whole new appreciation if we didn't have it already. Okay, we'll pause for Ma'ariv. Let's read again on top of page 15. So we see the Alter Rebbe's Chiddush again here. Nevertheless, according to Hillel, nevertheless, according to Hillel, a person does not, even in the present era, fulfill his obligation to eat marar unless he takes an additional olive-sized portion of matzah, wraps it with an olive-sized portion of marar, and eats them together. This is the chiddush we're learning here from the Alter Rebbe, that in order to fulfill the mitzvah of marar nowadays, according to Hillel, you have to have matzah also. This is the chiddush we're learning here. So let's now read how he learns back into the old day from Rambam. The second paragraph, page 15. The rationale is that the sages ordained that in the present era, marar be eaten as remembered to the Beis Mikdash in a manner representative of the scriptural obligation observed at the time. So what's the Chachamim's gzeira of marar? What's the mitzvah of marar? The mitzvah of marar is to eat marar the way they would have eaten then. Right? So the shayla is, how would you have eaten it then? Well, you have machlekes, and if you have to have two marars. Right? And in the era of the Beis Mikdash, according to Hillel, one would not fulfill his obligation for marar according to scriptural law unless he eats it wrapped together with matzah. Therefore, in the present era as well, one must wrap together with matzah. Right? That's what the Alter Rebbe is telling us. The mitzvah of marar is to eat marar today the same way they would have eaten it then. And according to Hillel, unless you eat matzah with marar with matzah in Beis Mikdash time, you don't fulfill your obligation. Therefore, now when you have to eat marar the same way it was eaten then, you have to have it with matzah. So matzah, eating the korech, is the mitzvah of marar according to Hillel. You clear on this chiddush here? Okay. Continue with halacha 18. However, Hillel's fellow sages, the Chaveira of Chachamim, differed with him and maintained that it was not necessary to wrap matzah and marar eaten together at all. If you did, they'd be okay with it, but not necessary. Neither according to scriptural law in the Beis Mikdash time, nor according to rabbinic law in the present era. So according to the Chachamim, according to their words, in the present era, if first one ate an olive-sized portion of matzah alone for the biblical commandment, and then ate an olive portion of marar wrapped together with an olive-sized portion of matzah. So if you skipped marar, you went from matzah to korech. Did you do your mitzvahs or not? According to Hillel, yes. But according to Chachamim, why not? In Beis Mikdash time, they would let you put it together. So why now no? Other way around. The time of matzah, which is not obligated, ruins your marar, which is obligated. So even though in Beis Mikdash time the Rabbanim will let you eat together, now they won't. But Hillel says, because you could only eat the marar together in Beis Mikdash time, the Chachamim say you have to eat it now together with matzah also. Let's keep going. Yeah? So if the person ate matzah and then korech, he will not fulfill his obligation for marar, according to the Chachamim, because the olive-sized portion of matzah in the wrap is matter left to a person's choice, because he already did the mitzvah, and it's not mitzvah at all according to their understanding. Hence, the matzah will detract from the mitzvah of marar, because it will nullify the flavor of the marar in the wrap when the person chews them together. You have to be clear on this. According to Hillel, by contrast, the matzah in the wrap is a rabbinic obligation. It's as part of the marar. Hence, it does not nullify the flavor of the marar, for it is also a rabbinic obligation. The two are equivalent and therefore do not nullify each other. So since the halacha was not unequivocally determined neither according to Hillel nor according to the sages, who differed with him, to satisfy both the opinions, a person must do the following. He must eat a kazayas portion of matzah alone, without marar, and recite the bracha al achilas matzah. With this olive-sized portion, he fulfills obligation to eat matzah according to the scriptural law, even according to Hillel. When the business time we would say to put it together, today you got to do matzah alone, for biblical obligation. Afterwards, the person must eat a olive-sized portion of matzah alone, without matzah, and recite the bracha al achilas matzah. With this olive-sized portion, he fulfills his obligation to eat matzah according to the other sages. Afterwards, the person should wrap an olive-sized portion of matzah and an olive-sized portion of matzah together, korech, and eat them together as a remembrance of the Beis Hamikdash, as Hillel maintains, meaning fulfilling the mitzvah of matzah according to Hillel, which is all about remembering the way it was. He should not recite a bracha, neither over the matzah nor over the marar when eating this wrap, when eating the korech, but perhaps the halacha follows the Chachamim, who differ with Hillel and maintain that eating this wrap does not fulfill a mitzvah at all. Moreover, according to Hillel, the person fulfills obligation with the blessing that he recited over the matzah and the marar previously. Okay. These last lines, what did the Rebbe say in the Hebrew? Hillel, who yotze b'brichas hamarar hamatzah v'hamarar sheberach kvar. I'm not making a bracha on the sandwich. Two reasons, says the Rebbe. Number one, because maybe the halacha follows the Chachamim, and sofek brachas la'akla. Because according to the Chachamim, matzah and marar is separately nowadays. Has to be separate nowadays, even if they let you put it together in Beis Hamikdash time. Reason number two, says the Rebbe, why you not making a bracha on korech, the following, is because the bracha of matzah and the bracha of marar, when you ate them alone, extend to the korech for Hillel's sandwich. Which obligation am I fulfilling when I eat matzah and marar together? No, which mitzvah? Which mitzvah? Matzah or marar? It's the mitzvah of marar.
How they did it back then.
So in other words, the Chachamim said you have to eat marar nowadays, and you have to eat it the way they did it then, which is together. But I'm fulfilling the mitzvah of marar. Yeah.
Or remembering the mitzvah because
Okay, let me ask the question a different way. This is what I'm really getting to. Which brachas that I made earlier extend to the korech? Why? I already fulfilled the mitzvah of matzah deraisa. The biblical mitzvah of matzah I did, and I ate this thing alone. Done. Now, what's the other mitzvah? It's a machlekes, how to fulfill marar. So why did Rebbe say here that the bracha of matzah and the bracha of marar extend to the sandwich? It should be just the bracha of marar. If all I'm fulfilling here is the mitzvah of marar according to Hillel. It's an unanswered question. And the Rebbe adds a line which will answer the question. Understand the question? Because really the mitzvah we're doing now is marar. Just the marar according to Hillel. Because it can't be alone. Moreover, at least here, the Alter Rebbe goes on to say, I didn't continue the rest of Halacha Yiches. Halacha Yiches goes on to say, and therefore, you should make no interruption from the matzah until after korech. That's really the same mitzvah. Yeah? But the Alter Rebbe doesn't say that while you're making the bracha on matzah, and while you're making the bracha on marar, you should have in mind the sandwich. It doesn't say that in the Shulchan Aruch. In the Haggadah, he does say that. In the Haggadah, he says when you eat in the Haggadah, he says, when you eat matzah, says the Alter Rebbe in the Siddur, you have to have in mind the korech, which doubles our question. Why when you eat matzah, why when you eat the bracha on matzah, do you have to remember the korech if the korech is only for the mitzvah of marar according to Hillel? When it comes to eating the marar, he doesn't say that when you make the bracha on marar, you should have in mind the marar of korech. Doesn't say it. And the Rebbe asks, why doesn't he say it? It's our custom to. Why doesn't he? Which means the Rebbe is saying like, it should have been in there. Right? But that's the Rebbe's question. We'll leave it alone. right? But our question is, why does he have to have in mind? Why is the bracha? Why is Alter Rebbe saying in the Shulchan Aruch that the bracha of matzah extends to the korech, when seemingly the korech is only about maror? And why in the Haggadah does he say to have in mind when you make the bracha on matzah to have in mind the korech also, when seemingly the korech is only to fulfill the mitzvah of maror according to Hillel? So let's see the Rebbe's Haggadah. It's on page 17, the bottom there. Okay. And you'll tell me which line the Rebbe puts in here that does not exist anywhere yet that we saw. Okay, korech, right? That's the italics there. That's like the Dibra HaMaschal. That's the Piska. That's the relevant quote from the Haggadah that the Rebbe is commenting on. So first he puts the source, Psachim Kuftes Vav Aleph. We learned that Gemara Psachim last week. Now the Rebbe does like a beautiful, like little synthesis of the whole Alter Rebbe in like one paragraph. The Das Hillel Azaken, in the view of Hillel the elder, Bisman Sheyesh Pesach, when you have a Pesach offering, according to Hillel, when you have the Pesach carbon, you don't fulfill your obligation unless you have Pesach, matzah, and maror, eat them all together. Okay. Pesach, when you have no Pesach, you will not fulfill your matzah obligation, which is biblical. Sorry. You will not fulfill your matzah obligation, which is biblical, unless you eat it alone. Because if you mix maror with it, you're ruining the flavor with a lower level. Okay. And according to Hillel, you will not fulfill your maror obligation, which the Chacham said, you got to eat maror now, the same way they ate it in Beis Mikdash time. So according to Hillel, you will not fulfill your obligation of maror, unless you eat it with maror together. As it was in the times of Beis Mikdash. Now listen to these words there, but this is the line. Nimtza, the result is, Yeshallah, the person now has upon him, this manazah nowadays, Chiyuv matzah sheni midrabanan, a second obligation to eat matzah. Where'd that come from? Did we see any makkah for that line? Not in the Alter Rebbe, not in the Shulchan Aruch, not in the Ramban. There was adding a new chiddush here. You have an obligation to eat a second matzah. This would explain why you have to. What's the Rebbe saying? The Rebbe saying now, you have two obligations now, the Rabbanon, according to Hillel. You have an obligation to eat matzah again, and you have an obligation to eat maror. Maror you haven't done yet, according to Hillel, because according to Hillel, eating maror alone doesn't count for anything, right? But because when you eat maror, according to Hillel, you have to also have matzah, otherwise you're not doing it the way it was. Says the Rebbe, that matzah is not an extension of your maror, it's a second matzah obligation. It changes in Alter Rebbe a little bit. When we looked at Alter Rebbe, we concluded you have an obligation to eat maror. Option A, maror alone chachamim. Option B, matzah together with it, hillel. But what's that matzah that you're eating together with maror? Be'etzem it's maror. It's really maror. It just happens to be matzah in order to fulfill maror. But says the Rebbe, no. You have two new obligations according to Hillel. Maror and matzah. Now, if you have a second matzah, that explains why you have to have in mind. We need a hesber. We still have to have an explanation. What does this mean? And where did we get this from? Exactly. So you have a second matzah to eat rabbanon. You have a second maror. You have a maror to eat rabbanon. Period. According to Hillel, you have a second matzah that's meant to accompany your maror. That's also rabbanon, and therefore they'll cancel each other. Right? But there is being mechadish here. That is part of the chiyuv for zeichel and mikdash to eat maror. It's not just you have to eat maror the way it was. You have to eat. The chacham are obligated to eat a second matzah according to Hillel with your maror. With a specific shear, that's for sure to do specific shear. But until now, we thought that matzah was part of maror. Now that I'm saying it's chiyuv matzah sheni, it's a second obligation of matzah. This is a big chiddush. You have to find a makkah for this. It's not in the Rishonim, not the Rishonim we saw at least. Not the only hint to it in the Alter Rebbe, which comes from the Torah really, is that when you eat the matzah, you have to have in mind the korech. Why would you have to have in mind the korech? Korech has nothing to do with matzah. But now we have an answer. Because according to the Hillel, the way the Rebbe is learning it, you have a second obligation. You have an obligation for a second matzah. What this means is it's a good shaila. I don't know what the word is. But somehow, as part of your maror obligation, you have an obligation to eat a second matzah. And therefore, when you make the bracha, this is what I'm suggesting. This is why when you make the bracha on matzah, you have to have in mind the korech also. Because the Rebbe says it's chiv matzah sheni. You have an obligation for a second matzah. We make a statement. This is what Hillel did. I'll address that statement in a second. But we don't make the bracha. This is what we're talking about on Shabbos, yeah? Okay, the Rebbe concludes. We don't know if to follow Hillel or the Chachamim, so we do both. Right? But this is a big chiddush from the Rebbe, that in the obligation of eating maror according to Hillel, you have an obligation to eat the second portion of matzah. Right? There was someone I saw once to suggest, Shmuel Shachat, Rabbi Shachat here, his brother, who suggests like this, that the reason why the Rebbe is doing this is because what did Hillel say to do? Hillel said to combine all your obligations, eat them together. If you only have a chiyuv of maror and no chiyuv of matzah, what obligations are you combining? You're not combining any obligations. You're doing one obligation of maror together with matzah, but you're not combining any obligations. And if in Beis Hamikdash time you would have combined obligations, then you have to have more obligations. You have to have two obligations to be combining today. And therefore you have matzah sheni. Okay, it's a chiddush, maybe it's a hezber. This is the way he learns. Understand what he said? If before the Rebbe was lying, that you have a second matzah, you have a chiyuv of maror, and you have to eat matzah along with it. So you didn't combine obligations. You just expanded the maror definition. But because the Rebbe says here that the Chachamim are giving you an obligation to eat a second portion of matzah, now you are actually combining obligations. Okay, this is what Rabbi Shachat suggested. Rabbi Shachat here, his brother. Either it's right or it's wrong, but the vart is for sure true that this line here in the Rebbe doesn't exist anywhere else. You have a second chiyuv of matzah. Let's conclude with this, which we began on Shabbos with. So on Shabbos, I told you, remember we spoke about this, we'll just recap it. So before we eat the KORECH, we say, Keinos Hillel, this is what Hillel did. Bisman Mikdash Kayim, we spoke about this with you. Bisman Beis Mikdash Kayim, in the time when the Beis Mikdash was standing, KORECH Pesach Matzah Maror V'Echel B'Yachad. He would combine Pesach Matzah and Maror together and eat them all together. Yeah? So we asked on Shabbos the Rebbe's question, not the Rebbe's question, this is a question that all the commentaries in Haggadah discuss. When you say this is what Hillel did, you're lying. Because he didn't do that. I'm eating matzah and maror. This is what Hillel did. He ate Pesach, matzah, and maror. I'm not. I'm eating matzah and maror. What am I saying? This is what he did.
We don't have
Huh? Okay, so then say that. But we don't say that. We say this is what Hillel did. Not true. So some people take the word Pesach out. They say this is what Hillel did. He would combine matzah and maror. That's also not true because he had Pesach. So either way, I'm not saying a truth. If I include the word Pesach, I'm not saying a truth about what I'm holding in my hand. So I only have matzah and maror. And if I take the word Pesach out and I say Hillel would have matzah and maror, I'm lying about what Hillel did. So which one do I do? So our custom is to have the word Pesach in it. So that gives two explanations. One is to push a Pshutisha Mikra, to translate the word Cain, not as this is what Hillel did, to translate it as the following is what Hillel did. The following is what Hillel did. He would eat Pesach, matzah, and maror together. I'm not describing what I'm holding in my hand. I'm describing what he did. Not this is what Hillel did, what I'm holding here, but the following is what he did. He would have Pesach, matzah, and maror. That's the explanation we give on Shabbos. Answer number one from the Rebbe. The Rebbe gives a second answer. Keinos Hillel, this is what Hillel did, where he would not eat maror alone. That's what I'm doing. I'm not eating maror alone. Because I have matzah with, no, because I have matzah. Oh, no, I don't mean that. Because I have matzah with it. So Keinos Hillel, this is what Hillel did. He did this. He would not eat maror alone. So me too, I'm not eating maror alone either. Follow? And this gives mamash a perfect language and a perfect everything to the halacha of a KORECH. You know, where we say it, right? The one is, where is it? Here. Oh, here. That's right. So because I'm saying like this is what Hillel did. He wouldn't eat maror alone, and neither am I eating the maror alone. So that's another way of understanding it. I encourage you to go to Rebbe's Haggadah. You read through all of KORECH. It's almost a full page, and you'll see how everything needs to become clear in light of this chiddush. So, for example, mentioned before that others have the custom to say that this is to remember what Hillel did. Keinos Hillel, this is what Hillel did. Now, if you do that, What are you implying? And this is what the Prima Gadam says. The Prima Gadam said the reason why you say Zeichel Mikdash Kehillel is you want to separate. You want to make it clear. Matzah and Mara we did already, and this is just to remember. Can we say that? According to Alter Rebbe Shitta, can we say that? That Matzah and Mara we did already by eating them alone, and now we're eating Korech just to remember? Can we say that according to Alter Rebbe? No, so I didn't do Matzah and Mara yet. So we take the word Zeichel Mikdash Kehillel out. We just say Kein Aselo. Because it wouldn't be true to say Zeichel Mikdash Kehillel. All kinds of diyukim. Likewise, we say this is what Hillel did in the time when the Beis Mikdash stood. Hillel's entire life was in the time of the Beis Mikdash. Just say this is what Hillel did. Why in the times of the Beis Mikdash standing? Because we're trying to say that the reason why I did this together is because the Beis Mikdash was standing, because they had a Pesach. That's why I did it this way. And therefore I'm doing the same thing he did, because that's the chiyuv to do what they did then. But the whole chiyuv is to do it the way they did it in the Beis Mikdash time. Not because Hillel did it, but because you did it because the Beis Mikdash was standing. And that's why I can do it now. And like this, the Rebbe explains, following this thread, all kinds of diyukim in the mitzvah and process of KORECH. Thank you for listening. Hope you all enjoyed. Learned something new.